Great Wednesday. Welcome to the Fully Human Connections podcast. I'm your host, King, and I'm joined by my co-host, Reggie. How you doing today, Reggie?
I'm doing well, King. Good to be with you again on a Wednesday morning. We missed a couple of these for various reasons over the last 2 weeks, so it's good to be back.
Well, I agree. As I learned from your president, it's your fault that we missed these last couple of weeks. So you're the person to blame. I was always available. So no, no, I'm kidding. Yeah. So glad to be back. Glad to be back with you. Um, had some challenges this morning to try to prevent me from being 10, but I'm not going to allow that. I'm going to choose to be a 10 because I don't see any value with being anything less than a 10, despite the challenges. And again, the challenges just means that I'm human. So with that being said, what's your spiritual energy number for today?
Well, you just put a lot of pressure on me by saying that, so I'm going to say 10. But I like the idea of choice, and so we have the ability to raise our energy level if we so choose, despite any inconveniences or aches and pains and things that we face. So I'm showing up as a 10.
Excellent.
Even though you're blaming me for everything.
Hey, that's the culture we live in now. It's like, don't take any accountability, always blame someone else, and who knows, you could become president.
I don't want to be president.
Well, I don't want to be that kind of person either. That's not any kind of leadership skills on my part. So folks who are listening, I'm just kidding. It wasn't Reggie's fault. It was really on me, and those challenges have been worked through. So I'm glad to be back. I'm glad to be back here on live with Reggie on this Wednesday. So with that being said, Reggie, what's your gratitude moment today?
So I'm grateful to be here. I'm grateful for my standard gratitude for indoor plumbing and clean drinking water, which was tested. I live in a place where I have well water, and the pump, which was 20 years old, stopped pumping about 2 weeks ago. It's been resolved, but for a few days we had to do makeshift things to get drinking water. So it just reminded me of how fortunate I really am. And then just that, my basic needs have been met my entire life. Not extravagantly, not in luxury, but in terms of just basic things being met. I have good friends and family, most of the family. Family can be. I get to do work I care about and have a relatively sound body. It's definitely it's in its 8th decade now, and it's I can feel that, but it's still pretty healthy. And as far as I can tell, and I trust you'll let me know if this changes, I think my mind is still working reasonably well as well. So I have all that to be grateful for.
Excellent. Those are great things to be grateful for. Like you, I'm grateful for my life, my health, my ability to see, hear, walk, talk, stand, breathe, and have sound mind. I'm grateful for the 24 hours to pursue my purpose in life. I'm grateful to be able to have the mindset to be on the path of being fully human and recognize the value in being on this journey. I'm also grateful for, again, still dealing with the passing. My mother died this year, a couple of months ago, but I'm grateful for the fact that she's no longer in pain. I had a conversation with a close friend about her passing yesterday, and she asked that question. I said, I'm still in that stage of just being grateful that she's not suffering. So I'm grateful for that. Grateful to be on this podcast with you this morning. Like I said, I had a couple of things to kind of try to prevent it, but I was able to overcome it, and I'm here. So finally, I'm grateful for the infinite possibilities that this day is going to provide.
Amen.
So with that being said, what do you feel is our topic for today?
Well, there's so much going on, and actually part of our topic is that there's so much going on, and I'll say what I mean by that specifically, and then you and I can kind of, just see where the conversation takes us. But more generally, for anybody who might be new, we've been speaking for just over 3 years now about in conversations about the United States, and specifically grounded in my 2022 book, Healing America's Narratives, the Feminine, the Masculine, and Our Collective National Shadow. Shadow meaning the denied or disowned parts of an individual or an organization or a nation. And we've covered all the, really all of the ground that's in the book. But the book again came out in 2022, so the current events continue to add to the basic thesis of the book, all of the denied parts of American culture and society. So more specifically for today, we are currently amid the ongoing fallout from the passage of, I don't even like using this language, but I'm going to use the language that they refer to it in the news, the big, beautiful bill, which is this 900-page bill that further gutted the American government, that made cuts to Medicaid, which they promised they would never do, which created in various ways the greatest transfer of wealth from the poor to the rich in this nation, which has transferred since 1980 a lot of money from the poor to the rich. And which was passed by the slimmest of margins in the Senate. The vice president, J.D. Vance, had to vote to break the tie. So it wasn't like there's any kind of mandate for this. It was 51-50 in the Senate, and the difference was 4 votes in the House of Representatives, with 3 or 4 Republicans voting with the Democrats. So that's one, this big, beautiful bill, and what's going to begin to unfold because of that bill. The second is the choice by the President of the United States to drop bombs on Iran's nuclear sites and then claim that they were obliterated, which was a lie because they're not obliterated, which is typical. With the re-emergence, which is really first and foremost in media for the last 3 or 4 days now, of the Jeffrey Epstein files. He was convicted of sex trafficking and accused of pedophilia, and he died in prison, supposedly of suicide. Donald Trump was a good friend of his. There were lots of photographs of them partying together. And for some years during the Biden administration, virtually everybody in the Trump administration today was clamoring for a release of what they call the Epstein files. They wanted to see all the details of this guy's life because they were convinced, and this is where it gets complicated, but I'm going to say all of this out loud and we can decide where to take it. They were convinced that there was going to indict many Democratic and left-wing elitists who were involved with Jeffrey Epstein and pedophilia and sex trafficking. Now, the interesting asterisk, especially about the sex trafficking thing, is the sex trafficking accusation of, and Hillary Clinton was accused of this and others. That was actually a Russian troll that created that. Within about 48 hours of Donald Trump's, was it CBS or NBC, when he was in that trailer talking to people and bragging about how we could touch women's genitals and kiss them unwantedly because he was a celebrity and what he could get away with as a celebrity. This was in 2016 when he was running for president. The Russians who preferred Trump to Clinton, within a day or two of the Trump thing going viral, which would really have damaged his candidacy, this whole thing about this pizza parlor in Washington, D.C., led by, or at least participated in by Hillary Clinton, where there were Satan worshiping pedophiles who were eating babies. This is, all right, there are many people in the MAGA sphere who believe that story. In 2019, in a poll, a legitimate poll, and I forget which organization conducted it, but I can find that really quickly if anybody doubts this. 30% of adults in America, based on the poll, believed that story. Among them were the current director of the FBI, the current attorney general, the current assistant director of the FBI. They all wanted it released. Now they don't want to release it. Well, some of them do. Trump doesn't. The Attorney General doesn't, but the director and the assistant director of the FBI do, and the MAGA base does. So that's been in the headlines. And I took the time to say that, all of that, because what else doesn't get as much coverage in the headlines because of that story is the ongoing detention and deportation of immigrants in the United States and some American citizens. More of the immigrants being detained and deported are either here legally or here without documentation, but have been here for 10, 20, 30 years, have made it their lives, have paid their taxes, have kids here. Very few of them are actually criminals. In other words, those are violent crimes and the things that they said they were going to remove. Now, there's still coverage of that, especially where it's happening. California being prominent, but not the only place. But what's happening is, the Ukraine war is still going on, the Russian attack on Ukraine. Trump is beginning to lean further towards trying to help Ukraine, again, after withholding help there. But this whole Jeffrey Epstein file thing has dominated the headlines for 3 or 4 days. And that's a strategy. I'm not saying that they plan to do this, but a very common strategy, very common in Russia with Putin, very common with Trump, is when things aren't going well, you release conspiracy theories, or you just say things that are nonsense into the news feed, and people get distracted by it for a few hours, a few days, or a few weeks. So I don't know exactly, nobody knows what's true about the Epstein files. I don't pretend to know, but it's a measure of the American people and of some of the leaders in the Trump administration that they care about that now, with deportations, with cuts to Medicaid, with shutting down the Department of Education, with the overturning of Roe v. Wade, which happened already, and with the Supreme Court that's getting these emergency cases put forth by the president, in 90-something% of them, they're finding in favor of what the president wants. So it's this whole authoritarian regime which continues to take all of the power of the judiciary, of the legislature, and obviously of the executive branch. And Americans are running around demanding the release. Some Americans are running around demanding the release of the Jeffrey Epstein files. So it's a combination of bad things happening and the unseriousness of tens of millions of people in the United States of America. And that's one of the reasons they have Donald Trump as a president now. So there's a lot going on. We can pick and choose where to put our attention for the next 45 minutes or so. But it's just this, it's designed to be this way, to exhaust us and exhaust our ability to pay attention so that nobody, unless you're really dedicated, knows what's true and what's not true. And that's how authoritarians can get away with almost anything, because people are exhausted to try to fight back, or they just believe what their side says. So it's a really dangerous time in the United States. And it's not this potential for things to get bad. Things have been bad since January, and they're getting progressively worse. And anybody who thinks that's not true is probably getting their news from Facebook or Twitter or something, or Fox News. So it's a dangerous time and continues to get more dangerous. And I left a lot out.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I've gotten to, again, I want to thank you for choosing another wonderful topic and for being here and being present. My initial thoughts for my initial first take is the fact that I look at it, you can always count on the Trump administration and now the current Republican Party to always default position cruelty, to be cruel. That's their default position.
Yeah.
What I hate is when they always try to make it seem as though there's this little hope that the Republicans may stand up and have a spine and do what's just, even for their own constituents, even if the constituents happen to be someone that doesn't look like the rest of America. And it, like when they, and I'm not going to use the term that Trump branded it as. I'm going to say the cruel suffering bill is what it is. You know, that when that was being negotiated through the houses of Congress and the Senate, they tried to make it, well, the House passed it pretty quickly, but they tried to make it seem that the Senate would stand up and have some spine because a few senators said that they didn't like the bill. Mm-hmm. And then that was the talk for a while that maybe they may stand and stop it. And I knew they wouldn't. And it's kind of like the news media tries to, and I hate to use this analogy, but I think it's the perfect analogy. The news media is like that absentee father who's never there for his son, but always promises, I'm going to come pick you up this weekend and take you out. And you want to have hope because he's your father. And he's always let you down in the past. So common sense and history tells you, don't believe your father. He's not coming. But you don't want to turn off your heart, and you still want to believe in your father and believe that he can take you out and you can have this experience. So anytime there's a glimmer of hope, you want to try to cling to that. And that's what our media does with us when it comes to this administration. They keep throwing out these little glimmers of hope as though at some point there's going to be justice. At some point they're going to do the humane thing. And they've always shown us they're not. They're going to always do what is the most cruel thing possible. It doesn't really benefit most people. It just really benefits. It's just an example of cruelty. That's what it is. And Trump coming out and naming the bill the big beautiful bill just for branding purposes. And then the media ran with that, and it's like they say that, and it's like there's nothing beautiful about it. Elon even came out and said, you can't have a bill that's big and beautiful at the same time. And not that I want to quote Elon ever, but that made sense in the context that he understood that branding was just a game. Trump is a master of marketing and branding. Whether he's successful with his businesses or not, he does have the ability to get people to accept an idea and then use that idea. And like you said, he's a master of the bait and switch because our media is complicit with it. Like if our media, who truly cares to be unbiased and fair journalists, should have said at the very beginning, we're not going to call this the big beautiful bill, regardless of what Trump, based off these facts. Because they will give you all the reasons why it's not the big beautiful bill, but then still refer to it as the big beautiful bill. And for most Americans, they're not listening to the in-depth analysis. They're listening to the summary. They're reading the headline and they're reading the byline. And the byline, the headline says big beautiful bill. So that's what the people are going to remember. That's how people are going to refer to it as. And in that context, Trump continues to keep winning over people with their language. I have a gentleman several people on Facebook, I have no idea. That's why I'm going to cancel my Facebook account. The reason I have it is because it keeps me in touch with my family, but it really serves me no other purpose. And I have folks who are friends of mine, according to Facebook. I never met these individuals before, but they're somehow or another we're connected as friends, according to Facebook, and these are some Africans, immigrants, some Black Americans who are Trump supporters, even a couple of white Americans who are Trump supporters that I never met in my life. And yet still I get to see their feed and how they are bragging about things that Trump is doing as though they're winning, as though they're benefiting from this. And they're not. It's kind of like listening to people talk about their favorite football team and saying, well, my team is doing, and my team just got a new quarterback, and my team just has this, and et cetera. And it's like, they're not your team. You're not benefiting from that. Now, at least fans of football or sports who say that, they can at least say that they can get some joy in watching a team that they've watched over a season go through adversity and challenges and come out ahead. I still think that folks who get that deep into it and put, unless you're making money or you're making some kind of value, I don't see that, personally for myself, I don't see the value from it. But I understand folks who do. But people who are Trump supporters, if you're not a billionaire or someone who's multi-millionaire, then I don't see how you could be excited about what Trump is doing in any shape, form, or fashion. It's not benefiting you. But they want to be able to brag on their Facebook posts about how he's owning the libs. And that's what the most important thing for them is that. And so as long as Trump has that base of people who don't really care about his cruelty at all, because in their minds, it doesn't impact them, doesn't affect them yet, and it will, because there's a hierarchy to his cruelty. And that's what people don't understand. I don't know, you have to be a system engineer to see this. Again, being a system engineer, understanding and being able to see systems and patterns and things, I came up with, I believe, what I call the hierarchy of cruelty. And the hierarchy of cruelty is this, and we talked about this a little bit the last time we had our session, which is, number one, Trump says, I'm going after the criminal immigrants, and I'm going to deport them. Mass deportations of criminal immigrants. Now, again, most people felt like, okay, the only thing people cared about at that time was how it was going to really impact the economy. It sounds cruel, but they're criminal, and there are immigrants who came over this country illegal. So illegal criminal immigrants. Let me be clear on that. So, yeah, I don't necessarily agree with this method, as most people were willing to say, but they didn't really fight it, right? So the next level was, okay, now I'm just going after the illegal immigrants and moved up from the criminal ones to illegal. So then we're going to still use the same cruel type of policing, type of deportation, mass deportation, breaking into people's homes here in America, whether they're illegal or not. By definition, they're still here and they're still humans. That's how I look at it. And so then people say, okay, well, maybe that's a little wrong. But again, if you're born here as an American person, you stand, it doesn't really impact me. It's wrong, but I'm not going to really get out here and fight it. That's what I believe most people say. They may talk about it on Facebook. He shouldn't do it. It's wrong, but they're not really doing anything beyond that. They're just watching it happen as bystanders. Then you got your next tier, and that's your naturalized citizens that he's saying he wants to go after. And then some folks who are American citizens saying, okay, still not me, still wrong, still gets the Constitution, but still doesn't get into my group. So, I'm not worried as much. And it's like watching when they're showing you video footage of a neighboring state suffering. It's wrong, and my thoughts and prayers go out, but still not my state. Still, I don't have to worry about being impacted by it. Then you have your next tier, which is going to be American citizens who disagree with him, who are not in line with his values, and who are not MAGA. They're going to be the ones that get deported next, as he's trying to say with Rosie O'Donnell. So this is where it bothers me that our media and our society are just really watching this, and it shows how most people are not going to react until it's too late. And we studied the Revolutionary War. We always famously hear about Paul Revere had to ride through the streets and get everybody, the British is coming, because it took one man to be willing to just get out there and ride a horse, and no one talks about how long it took him to really do it and how much time and effort. But that's what we really need, is someone to really, in the media, to be a journalist and stand up to them and say, we're not going to continue to keep trying to give this administration the credibility and the same kind of grace that we normally, and the same type of reverence we give regular administrations, because it's a cruel, demonic administration, and they have authoritarian behaviors, and they have an authoritarian agenda, and that's clear. I think most people shows I used to watch, I don't want to watch anymore, because I realize it's like watching sports analysts talk about the game, and they tell you from again, I use sports analysis because again, politics has shifted to follow that kind of a model. They just following is the same type of analysis that sports analysts do. Where they used to have journalists that talked about the sports, now they just have paid people to give their opinions. Whether they're former athletes, whether they're journalists, they're not doing it from a journalistic context. They're doing it from a here's my opinion context. And then they guess who's going to win. They state these facts, and then they're wrong 90% of the time. And that's where our politics have gotten to the point where that's what it is. So for me, for my own mental well-being and clarity, I I'm refusing to listen to the news most of the time alone. That especially get caught up in believing that this Epstein situation is going to really impact Trump's voters. Like people are saying, well, Mega, this may really might bring Trump down this time. It's the Mega people are really up right for this news cycle, for this week until, as you say, Trump does something that is going to be really cruel to some minority group, some disadvantaged, marginalized group of people, whether they're in the United States or whether they're overseas. He's going to do something cruel and change the news cycle, and then we won't talk about that anymore. Just like it was dominating for 10 days, the WhatsApp tweet that Pete Headsmith and all of them were on. That dominated the news cycle until I believe he dropped a bomb. He did something else. Either sent troops to Los Angeles, something cruel, and that just shifted the headlines. And we haven't gone back to that anymore. We don't even talk about that anymore at all. That's blown over. So this is going to blow over as well. This is just content. And as a person who's in this business of helping business create content marketing to get more eyeballs and awareness about their brand, their products, their services, I'm clear on what content looks like. And if you can create content and create sensational headlines and get things that people are going to comment on, emotionally attached to these stories about Epstein, about Trump now saying that Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, and Joe Biden were the ones that actually create this whole Epstein thing, and they wrote that. I mean, he just says whatever out of his mouth because he understands how human behavior is at this level. He's clear on it more than most people. So it doesn't matter. Like you can count on him to be ridiculous in his comments, to just come out with some kind of falsehood, and then the media runs with it because he's a president. And so I just want to conclude by saying I wonder at what point are we going to say we're no longer going to report things that are crazy. Like I said, as much as I like Jimmy Kimmel and some of the late night hosts, I said I'm going to stop watching them, but there was a comedy behind it. I like the brilliance of the comedy. But he kept me abreast. I've never had a Truth Social account, would never know what Trump is saying on Truth Social. But just by watching his monologue every night on YouTube, just the clips, he would recap Trump's tweets on Truth Social every night. It kept me abreast. So it's like, even if you say you hate Trump, you don't like Trump, if you're talking about him and you're mentioning his lies and his deceitfulness and his propaganda on your platforms, then you're still advancing his agenda. So,
yeah, I mean, a lot there. So two things I want to just zero in on. I'll save what I think is the most important one for second, which is the idea of cruelty. The last 2 weeks on my own Substack newsletter, I really dealt with dehumanization and the myth, what I call, not what I call, but what a lot of people call the myth of separability. But I'll come back to that since you mentioned the cruelty thing. One thing I want to differentiate, though, is the difference between the news media, and I agree with your critique of it, and investigative journalists, many of whom work within that umbrella of the news media. And there are some really good people doing really good work nationally and internationally, and they work for a variety of, what people now call the legacy media, but they work for the New York Times, the Washington Post, ABC, CBS, And they're really out there doing investigative journalists, and they report the news. And we need them because they don't say things that aren't true, and they report what they see, and the broadcast people have film to go along with it. The people in the Times and the Post write things. The vast majority of Americans, definitely the vast majority of Trump supporters, don't read any long form journalism. And that's a real problem. They scroll through their phones and they find things that they think they agree with and they just repeat them. And that's been going on for over 10 years now. But someone like Adams, and The Atlantic is another, I think, really legit publication. And someone like Adam Serwer at The Atlantic in 2018 wrote a piece called "The Cruelty is the Point." So this is during Trump's first term. And he pointed this out, not just him, but he did a great job with it, pointing out that it was just like they enjoyed, there was a gleefulness in causing suffering for other people, to your point. I agree with that 100%. But it's not that good journalists don't point to it. It's just that it gets lost in all the other noise. And the vast majority of Americans don't read, something that's going to take them between 5 and 10 minutes to read, because that's long once you're accustomed to scrolling through your phone or your computer screen. So again, just to differentiate, the news media, which includes all those commentators that you're talking about, the talking heads who aren't reporting the news, they're giving their opinions on it. And very rarely in my life have I learned something from a news commentator that I didn't get from the journalist who reported the story, because my brain works reasonably well so far. I don't need somebody else to tell me what it means. And I don't care if that person's on MSNBC or Fox or any place else. So that differentiation is important. The cruelty piece, and what I've been using the word dehumanization, but we're talking, about the same thing. There's a history of how to talk about that. And typically, let's start with the current day. Jeffrey Miller, has a goal, and Kristi Noem agrees with it, and I assume Donald Trump and Pam Bondi too as well. And what's his name? Homan, the director of Homeland Security. They all agree it's like 3,000 immigrants a day. That's their goal. And what gets lost when you say that, what gets lost when they say, so far we've detained, it's over 60,000 now. I don't know exactly what the number is. 60,000 immigrants. Let's just back up for a second. Let's look at that history. Stalin starved a couple of million Ukrainians in the first third of the 20th century. Hitler and Stalin together killed, through starvation, shooting, and gassing, the gassing was Hitler, about 14 million people from the early 20s through 1945. On September 11th, 2001, at first they thought 6,000 people died, but it was actually just under 3,000 people were killed. And I'd go on. I could name these large numbers, even smaller numbers. 20 first graders at Sandy Hook. And what Timothy Snyder, who wrote the book Bloodlands about Stalin and Hitler, what Rabbi Mark Gelman, who delivered this beautiful, I'd call it a eulogy, I guess, at Yankee Stadium on September 12th, 2001. He was one of the speakers at the memorial service for the first responders who died. And both of them and others speak about not that 6 million Jews died in the Holocaust, or 2,000 something people died in the trade centers and in the Pentagon or on the Flight 93. but that one person died 6,000 times. And if you're going to deport 3,000 immigrants a day, it's one human life being deported 3,000 times a day. They haven't hit that 3,000 mark, but that's their goal. And that one life has a name. That person had parents. In many of these cases, that person had a job and an employer and paid his taxes or her taxes. That person had kids. In the case of one landscaper in the greater Los Angeles area, wasn't Los Angeles, I forget the exact town, but he had 3 grown sons, one of whom was a Marine Corps veteran and the other 2 are active duty Marines. And the anonymity that the large numbers provide us with, 6,000 people died. That was the first number given on September 11th. 6 million people died at the hands of the Nazis. 14 million people died if you take all of the starvation, the firing squads, and the gassing between Stalin and Hitler. And it changes if you start getting interested in one life at a time. It gets a lot harder to be okay with what went on historically. I didn't even mention Native Americans and enslaved Africans and African Americans. If you get into that one human life at a time, it takes a real cold-hearted, underdeveloped person to not care about that. Now, just to be clear, I believe in institutions. I believe in the institution of law. I believe that if you commit a crime, are arrested, and are convicted by a jury of your peers, you should pay the consequences for that. Whether it's a fine, whether it's a fine plus imprisonment for a certain period of time, as long as the law is enforced equally across the board. But we know that it's not. So if there are some undocumented immigrants who committed violent crimes, they should be tried and convicted and imprisoned, whether it's imprisoned here or imprisoned somewhere else. But the same is true with American citizens. If you commit a crime, you get caught, tried and convicted, imprisoned if that's what it calls for. So I'm not talking about not enforcing the law. I'm talking about making sure that the law is enforced equally for all humans who are in this territory we call the United States of America, and not making it a dehumanizing process. There are countries in Europe who, by default, educate their criminals, including their most violent criminals. And they release them after a certain number of years. And the recidivism rate in those countries is exponentially, metaphorically speaking, lower than in the United States, where we basically punish people. I mean, putting somebody in prison is punishment enough. You've taken away their freedom to walk around and do the things they want to do in their life, and they put them in a cage. That's punishment. But in that cage, if you give them the opportunity for education, give them decent food, not slop, don't let them be raped by other prisoners, make sure the guards are not as bad criminals as the prisoners are, a whole different approach to humanizing these people comes into play. And this administration, as Adam Serwer wrote 8 years ago now, 7 years ago, enjoys the cruelty. And in the second term, they seem to enjoy it even more. And they're willing to spend billions of dollars to make sure they can be cruel. You're going on tours of the alligator Alcatraz, making a joke about the detention camp. So amen to this idea of dehumanization. And those Americans who take glee in that, and race definitely plays in, because the vast majority of these people being detained and deported are brown skinned, or they have Middle Eastern last names or both. So, it's not about race as well. And this decision, who really is a human being and who's not. So it's a really dangerous time because last thing I'll say, I mean, and I'm not contrasting, I'm not saying that the Trump administration is moving toward assassinations and mass killings. I'm not saying that. I don't know if they are or not. So I wouldn't say that they are, but I don't know if they are or not. But the dehumanization and the detention, whether it was the successful large farmers in the Soviet Union, Ukraine at the time, whether it was the Jews in the target of the Nazis, they were first dehumanized. They were first blamed for the ills of the countries. Then they were detained. Then they were deported. And then in the case of Stalin and Hitler, then they were killed. So the early stages are exactly that same move that we saw, that people who are old enough saw in the first third, almost half of the 20th century in Europe. And there's a gleefulness in Pam Bondi, in Stephen Miller, in Donald Trump, in Kash Patel, in Kristi Noem, in Tom Homan. There's a certain joy in what they're doing. And they can't hide it, even when they try to talk seriously. And these are dangerous people, as are their supporters.
Well, yeah, and I just want to add before we go into our break, for our sponsor, that the biggest example of that philosophy and that system of dehumanization, there is no clear example than with enslaved people being called 3/5 of a man. Not even a human man. A black man wasn't even a human person in the eyes of the Constitution to justify that. The Catholic Church didn't look at Africans as being humans. So dehumanizing is, like you said, that's the first step in the hierarchy of cruelty, to say once we can get you not to see certain people who look different based off skin color, religion, ethnicity, whatever the case may be, and say they're not human, and really begin to get people to put that into the zeitgeist of how we function in society. And initially you're gonna get some pushback. They're gonna be considered they would use the term far right extremists. But the Republican Party used to look at a lot of things that MAGA does as far right and extremists. Now it's become the Republican Party. So there's no longer extremists. That is, cruelty is the Republican Party. There's a default operating procedure. There's nothing about looking out for their constituents anymore. I don't know how Ted Cruz even gets elected, to be honest. I don't know. I would love to hear someone who is a rational thinker, not someone who's sold on a whole mega ticket and just believes and drink all the Kool-Aid, but somebody who can truly say, here's why I vote for Ted Cruz. This is what I believe he's doing for my community, for the Texas area that he represents. I would love to hear that argument. And I don't believe it can be stated. Because every time there's a disaster, he's always there at the podium looking stupid. He's always leaving the state. He's never sitting around saying, well, here's what Ted Cruz makes sure that the local businesses at least got that. I would love to hear that type of conversation or advocacy to substantiate his value that he brings, because he constantly keeps getting reelected. And other than to be cruel and be demonic, it's the only thing I can think of why you would elect him. But I want to pick back up more on after our break. So we're going to take our break now for our sponsor.
The playbook for growing a local business online is simple. Capture new leads, conversationally convert those leads into sales, turn those customers into positive reviews, and then reactivate those customers into repeat buyers. And that's exactly what our platform does. In order to consistently generate new leads, you first need to be found. The quickest way to get search engines like Google to put your business at the top of search results is by having a steady flow of positive reviews. With our platform, you can show up in search and stand apart from your local competition by easily collecting new customer reviews through text. But getting found is only the beginning. Most consumers choose the first business that responds to them. So unless you start conversations with potential customers almost instantly, they'll go somewhere else. That's why we make starting conversations with website visitors as easy as clicking a button, connecting you instantly through text message so the conversation doesn't end when they leave your website. And we bring all your leads, no matter where they come from, into a single conversation stream that supports text, email, video messaging, Google Business Chats, and even Facebook and Instagram DMs, so you can respond faster and more efficiently than ever. When it comes to turning all those conversations into customers, we make collecting payments just another convenient part of the combo, so you get paid faster no matter how they prefer to pay. Next, you'll want to turn your new customers into happy reviews, which is a snap with our new review request quick actions. The more conversations and customers you generate, the easier it becomes to drive repeat business. We make reactivating contacts into customers as easy as, yup, you guessed it, the push of a button. With bulk actions, you can send out text and email campaigns to generate new sales whenever you have a new update, promotion, or story to tell. We make modern online marketing simple. Let's start growing your business today.
And we're back. Welcome to the Fully Human Connections podcast. I'm your host, Kane. I'm joined by Reggie. And we want to piggyback off the conversation we were having. I just want to kind of wrap up my second take and just talk about my analysis. Again, I know I'm still developing this, and I'm sure it's going to be controversial to some folks. And I'm going to ask some folks that are listening to give me some grace as I talk about this, because this is where I believe everything stems from and comes down to, and this is what I'm saying right now. I think one of the biggest mistakes people are making is still making it about race. And see, it's not about race, it's about identity. And what I mean by that is, if you identify with white identity, not the right race, white identity, then you're identifying with superiority in a system structure that's designed to be in the best interest of that identity. And that's what we see with a lot of Hispanics are choosing white identity. Talk about Nick Fuentes being running some far right racist group, and he's not even white. I see a lot of Africans identify with it. I see a lot of several Black Americans identifying with white, Clarence Thomas, to name a few. And the mistake they're making is that they think that by them identifying with white identity, that separates them and they're going to be different and treated different. And they are temporarily because they help fit an agenda. But once all the others are taken out of the place or put in their place in a much more systematic fashion, they're going to be regulated. They're going to learn that they're not white identity, as we've learned throughout the history of this country, where we learned that Irish wasn't considered white, and then they were allowed into the white identity. Jews were not considered white, and then they were allowed later on into the white identity. And I was joking with a friend of mine the other day. During a conversation, I just came up with this idea. I said, did you hear what Trump administration has done? He said, no, what? I said, they've changed the application on the government applications to say they've taken away the African American checkbox. Now all we have to choose is the white and non-white. That's our choices. And they was like, really? They believe that. And even though I was joking, I can definitely see that happening, because we see that slowly And again, how does it benefit anyone to say we're not even going to allow you all to even teach your history at all? Because we call it woke ideology. Not that it's not true. See, that's never the argument that's made, is that it's not true. It's just that it gets branded with woke. So we're not going to teach it. We're not going to allow it to be taught. We're not going to support it in our school systems. And it's like, again, error on the side of cruelty. That's just cruel. How does that benefit anybody? You really believe that you're protecting children, white children, because they don't want to learn that this been evil done in the past? And people understand that we're human. That was a time where those things happened, but we would like to believe that we've transformed, we've grown since then, and we're better mentally, spiritually, emotionally. We're better human beings. We're much more emotionally intelligent now than we were. We're much more empathetic about seeing and more inclusive in our society. But then the direction that the MAGA administration is going in is to be less inclusive. So for me, that's where everything stems from. It goes back to identity and how do you see yourself. I'll give you an example of what I mean by that real quick, and I wrap this up, my portion of it. That is, again, as my business every day, I'm making connections, it's King Connections, and I have a podcast called King Connections, in which I interview people who I believe exhibit the fully human behavior characteristics, whether they're authors of books or business leaders in their business or impact investors. That's who I like to pretty much interview on the King Connections podcast. And before I have them on my podcast, I have an alignment call to determine whether or not they're in alignment with the fully human behavior characteristics, despite what their LinkedIn profile may say or the referral who sent that person to me. Because I realize that some people are not what they write on their LinkedIn profile, or they're not what the person who referred them to me may believe them to be, and then it's a horrible podcast. I learned that in the past. So doing these alignment calls with these complete strangers, I have never met these individuals before, other than, again, reading data from a bio or profile link or social media accounts. And we hop on a Zoom call together, and we there face to face on a camera. That's when you get a chance to really see the authenticity of who a person is. And I ask the question, like I asked you, what's your spiritual energy number? That sets the context for the conversation. And each person that I actually have on my podcast, we actually engage and we communicate in a way that is intrinsically valued to both of us. We both leave the conversation saying, I enjoy this conversation. I look forward to the podcast. Because, and the racial identity of these people, they don't identify by their behaviors. They identify as human beings. Like I identify as a human being. I don't identify as a black man. And I know some people might have a problem with that, who are watching me and happen to be the same race and say, how can you say that? It's through growth. It's through understanding. There's no value in holding on to this racial construct that was created to separate us. We're human beings at the end of the day. And if you identify as a human being and I identify as a human being foremost, then I, by default, will see you as a human being, not as a white man standing across from me or a white woman or whoever the person may be that I'm actually talking to across the camera. I see them as a human being, and we engage as human beings. And our goal is to bring value to a conversation and bring value to each other's lives. That's where both our goals are. And the conversation always, and I got to improve on this, but it goes beyond our 15-minute a lot of time, because we're both getting value and we both find it so refreshing to have a conversation where we're not guarded by, he's wondering, I don't want to be offensive to him, so let me make sure, because he's black, let me try to be careful and walk on thin ice, or she's white, so let me make sure I don't try to offend her. We don't have that anxiety of going through that exercise. We can just look at each other, see the humanity in both of us, be authentic in our conversation, and through that, we discover that there's a line.
Yeah, I mean, beautiful. And, the goal I think our human race, our species has, is to begin, that's how kids need to be educated. from the womb forward, um, and not to make believe there's not different ethnicities and different languages and obviously different skin pigmentations, but to identify first with that humanness and then celebrate the differences among the humans. So I love that.
I'm sorry, Reggie. Let me add just one last piece before I wrap up. I just want to make this statement to you. We've had discussions when I first met you, and I learned that you wrote the book, Healing America's Narratives. And I asked you at that time, I said, I know you're going to get asked this question as a white man. What qualifies you to write a book about Native Americans and Africans and women suffering? And you gave your answer at that time. Mm-hmm. And I was at that time just being exposed to the fully human concept and the movement, I would call it. But now I've learned that the answer to that question for you, if I had to answer it for you, what gives you the qualifications to do that is because you're a human being and you saw the humanity in others and you can write about the humanities of others. So I just wanted to add that last little point there.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And in fact, the answer that I did give, which indirectly did say what you said, what you just said now, but I basically was honest enough to say that as a human being who saw the humanity in others, I wanted to point to the bigger picture of what was happening across the board. If I had been a woman, I might have written a different book if I only identified as a woman. If I had been a Native American, I might have written a book that focused on that only. Or if I had been an African American or a Black person, I might have focused on that. And I had the grace, I was fortunate enough, I was lucky enough to recognize the humanity and just try to connect all those dots. So I appreciate your pointing to that. And it's probably time for us to move into my magic bullet that's going to help everybody out there resolve all these issues so we can live happily ever after. So far, it's not working. So, but the one thing I would say, joking aside, and this is probably the hardest one. Most of the ones I've given have been, check yourself when you're making a judgment on something specific. But this one I would say, find a way, either historically or currently, or preferably both. Currently, find the name of somebody who's being detained by ICE. In other words, do some digging, whether it's local in your community or whether it's someplace that's in the news, and just find one name and find out all you can find out about that person. Humanize that person. So it's not this, what the Trump administration says, it's not this illegal alien. It might be a documented or undocumented immigrant. We don't know because they're picking everybody up, including some American citizens who look like they could be undocumented immigrants. That means the color of their hair, the color of their skin, and maybe the language that they're speaking. So there's a certain look, which basically nowadays in this current stage is Latino, to overly simplify it. But it's people who are from the Caribbean, from Central America, from South America. Find the name and humanize the individual. Do one at a time. Get curious about that. And then you can do the same for people who were formerly enslaved, people who were killed on 9/11, kids who were killed at Sandy Hook or Parkland or wherever. Begin to humanize these one at a time. Get away from the big numbers. Read about a Holocaust victim, etc. Because it's one life at a time. Each of us lives one life at a time. So that's how we have to interact with each other. One human being at a time. Do that and get back to us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, as we wrap up our show, our last segment of our show is to give an example of someone who we believe has either behaved according to these fully human characteristics that we are outlining in behaviors, or is currently doing that. And the person I'm going to choose, and is someone who I look at as, again, this is someone who inspires me to be better. It gives me a example of what it looks like to be fully human that I can aspire to. And that gentleman is Paul Newman, the actor, the advocate, the philanthropist. And most people are familiar with Paul Newman, especially if you were born, if you were from my generation. Um, Maybe millennials may not know him, and definitely Generation Zs may not know him. But let me educate people on who Paul Newman is and why I choose Paul Newman as my example of someone to highlight and lift up right now. So again, this is based on my 6 pillars because, again, I'm a person, I always mention the fact that I'm a system engineer, or I have the background, is because I think in frameworks, I think in processes, and I want to make sure folks understand why I come up with these frameworks and processes, and that's the training that I have. So I've come up with what I believe to be 6 pillars of fully human. Number 1 starts with identity. Newman's identity was woven from humility and authenticity, often resisting the allure of celebrity trappings in favor of genuine connection. His core struggle was being perceived as his true self beyond the on-screen persona. Growth mindset. He exemplified resilience, viewing adversity, including loss and personal setbacks, as opportunities for growth. Yet inner battles with self-doubt were often kept private, not always transformed into public teaching moments. Number 3, higher purpose and service. Service was a guiding principle evidenced by extensive charity work like Newman's Own and the Serious Fund Children's Network. Though he downplayed philanthropic motives, his legacy set an enduring standard in servant leadership. Core principles. Known for unwavering integrity and a commitment to justice, Newman's personal and professional choices often reflected deep values. Coping with heartbreak and imperfection added human complexity to his principled life. Grateful spirit. Gratitude and a spirit of simple abundance anchored Newman's perspective. He named himself a lucky guy and expressed through actions of kindness, even as he endured personal loss. And finally, pillar number 6, self-awareness. Through memoirs and interviews, Newman was notably self-aware, openly addressing insecurities, motivations, and contradictions within fame. Occasionally, these reflections were solitary, suggesting the importance of communal processing. What stands out in Paul Newman's legacy is the paradox of quiet humility married to outsized impact. Here's a man who shaped his identity in resistance to myth-making, yet left an astonishing philanthropic footprint, donating hundreds of millions and touching countless lives through both art and service. Newman's reflective honesty about his own insecurities brings refreshing vulnerability, while his gratitude and servant leadership model a life both deeply lived and generously given. So I choose Paul Newman for those reasons. And I found a Facebook post which brought Paul Newman more back into the forefront for me because I was reading an article that somebody put on Facebook. So Facebook does bring value at some point. In some instances, I should say. It talked about how when he was on set, actors, particularly actors of his stature, would get all of this food and donations, and it would be limousines and all those things offered because they felt that the actor of his stature deserved that. And he would always say and donate the food, the rides to hospitals and schools, and he would not take any of those type of gifts because he said that I don't deserve those things. That folks who normally would not get those things, let them have the benefit of receiving these gifts today. And finally, I support and personally purchase Newman's products, his salad dressings, his other food products, because they're good and because he says on his reader labels, 100% of the profits go to charity.
Hmm.
So Paul Newman's example of my fully human today.
Yeah, beautiful. I mean, it reminds me of the tech billionaires, how they do the same thing. Oh, was that my outside voice? Sorry. No, I love that. I mean, I grew up with, I mean, I'm of that, I'm a little bit older than you. So, yeah, Paul Newman was a gem both as an actor and as a human being. And what was it? The Hole in the Wall Camp. He named it after the Hole in the Wall gang from Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid. It was a camp for kids who had various diseases. I forget all the details of it, but that's one of the things that he founded. So yeah, and he was a good-looking guy.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm going to go with thank you for that one. More personally, somebody I think I may have mentioned once before, and I'm just going to use to protect her privacy or to value her privacy. I'll just use her first name, but Shari, who is my partner, who's for the last 5 years has been driving down to take care of her elderly mom, who passed away 2 weeks ago, finally, at the age of 92, who was really suffering. And just watching her do that, working 4 days a week and then taking all her days off and driving down and staying over to take care of her mom, who was in just a lot of pain. And, if the universe was fair, would have died 4 or 5 years ago because she was just suffering every day. She didn't have any joy in her life. So just watching as she took care of her and then came home that final time with a 17-year-old cat who's now scratching at my door. Just want to, take a deep bow make a deep bow to Shari, who if she ever, she hasn't watched these. If she ever did, she'd be mortified. But that's even better because you met her once, so that's cool. But that's for Shari.
Well, thank you. And to Sherry, you're right. I've met her. You share a lot of stories about her. I think she's a wonderful, kind, beautiful spirit, and I wish her the best and things that she do. And thank you for lifting her up as well. So as we conclude our show, this has been a Fully Human Connections podcast. Again, we've gone over a little bit because, again, these times I believe it's hard to really kind of get everything we want in within an hour time frame like it used to be in the past. These are some interesting times that we're living in. I still find hope, mainly because I meet people on a daily basis who show me that there is hope and how they're being fully human. I don't know how that's going to translate into saving America and all that for right now, but at least for my own mental well-being, I see that all hope is not lost. So thank you for being here, Reggie, again, showing up, being present, being positive, for writing a book, for being fully human. Thank you, listening audience, for listening to this episode, whether it's live or a recording. And until next Wednesday at 10 a.m., let's all continue to strive to be more fully human. Thank you.